Princess Sivillith Gadoran stood at the great window of her chamber and watched the human transport ship descend through the purple clouds of her homeworld. She had spent 3 months studying everything the Galactic archives contained about humans, and she was not impressed by what she had learned. The archives called them Class 7 Persistence Predators, which was a fancy way of saying they were creatures who hunted by following their prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. How primitive. She thought her own people, the Valorians, were magnificent beings who stood over 8 feet tall with skin that glowed with soft bioluminescent light and bones made of living crystal harder than industrial diamonds. They had conquered 12 star systems through sheer biological superiority. And military genius humans, by contrast, were small and soft and breakable. Their bones were made of calcium, which was laughably weak. Their skin could be cut by simple metal. They could not see in the dark or hear frequencies beyond a narrow range or survive in vacuum for even a few seconds. And yet somehow these fragile creatures had fought the Valorian expansion fleet to a standstill at the Battle of Kepler 442b. The war had ended not in Valorian victory, as everyone had expected, but in a negotiated peace treaty. Part of that treaty was a marriage alliance between the two species. Sivillith was the sacrifice. Her father had chosen to seal this agreement. She was to marry a human ambassador named Marcus Cole and produce hybrid heirs if such a thing was even biologically possible. The transport ship landed in the palace courtyard, and Sivillith made her way down to greet her future husband. She wore her finest ceremonial gown, a flowing garment of woven light that shifted colors with her mood. Currently, it burned a deep, irritated orange. The ship's ramp lowered, and out walked the most ordinary creature Sivillith had ever seen. Marcus Cole was average height for a human, which meant he barely reached her chest. He had brown hair and brown eyes and brown skin, and nothing about him suggested strength or power or danger. He smiled when he saw her, and the smile reached his eyes in a way that seemed genuine. "Princess Sivillith," he said, and his voice was warm and friendly. "I have heard so much about you, and I'm honored to finally meet you in person." He bowed in the human fashion, which looked somewhat ridiculous, but was clearly meant with respect. Sivillith inclined her head, the minimum amount required by protocol. "Ambassador Cole," she replied. "Welcome to Valoria Prime, and to what will be your new home. Please call me Marcus," he said, still smiling that gentle smile. "And I brought you something from Earth." He reached into his bag and pulled out a bundle of colorful flowers wrapped in paper. "They are called roses," he explained. "And on my world we give them to people we wish to honor and care for." Sivillith stared at the flowers and did not know what to do. Valorians did not engage in such primitive courtship rituals. Gifts were exchanged between equals as signs of political alliance, not given freely as expressions of sentiment. "They are acceptable," she said finally. Taking the bundle, Marcus did not seem bothered by her cold response. Over the following weeks, Sivillith watched her new husband with growing confusion. He was nothing like what she had expected from a species that had somehow survived a war against her people. He was gentle and patient, and kind to everyone he met. He learned the names of all the palace servants and asked them about their families and their lives. He complimented the cooks on their food even when the Valorian cuisine was clearly too spicy for his human palate. He spent hours in the palace gardens, tending to the plants and talking to the gardeners about different growing techniques. When Sivillith's younger brother, Prince Kethvin, deliberately insulted Marcus at a state dinner, calling humans upright vermin in front of the entire court, Marcus simply laughed. "Your wit is impressive, Prince Kethvin," he said with that same easy smile. "I can see why your sister speaks so highly of you." Sivillith had never spoken highly of her brother to anyone, but Marcus had diffused the situation so smoothly that even Kethvin seemed confused later that night. Sivillith reported to her father. In his private chambers, he is docile, she told the Emperor. Gentle and harmless in every way I can observe. The humans have sent us their most peaceful specimen, perhaps hoping that weakness will inspire pity. Emperor Khadran was ancient by any species standards, his crystalline bones grown thick with age, and his bioluminescent markings faded to a soft glow. He had ruled the Valorian Empire for 300 years and had personally led the fleet at Kepler 442b. He said nothing in response to his daughter's assessment, but something flickered in his old eyes that Sivillith did not understand. Be watchful, daughter, was all he said. Humans are not always what they appear to be. Sivillith dismissed her father's warning as the paranoia of old age. She had seen Marcus flinch at loud noises and struggle to keep up with Valorian walking pace and ask for help opening containers that any Valorian child could manage. He carried no visible weapons, he wore no armor. He spent his evenings reading human poetry and writing letters to his family on Earth Week. She thought every time she looked at him, they have given me a pet rather than a partner. What Sivillith did not notice was how Marcus never sat with his back to a door. She did not notice how his eyes moved constantly, tracking the position of every god in every room they entered. She did not notice how he always knew exactly how many people were in any space. Even when some of them were hidden from view, she did not notice the calluses on his hands, hidden beneath the soft diplomatic gloves he always wore. And she certainly did not notice the long cloth-wrapped object he kept in their shared chambers. Tucked behind his modest human belongings in a corner she never thought to examine, Marcus was patient. He had been trained to be patient. The mission briefing before he left Earth had been very clear about what was expected of him. You will be underestimated, Admiral Chun had told him. And that is exactly what we need. Let them think you are harmless. Let them think humans are soft and weak and easily conquered. And if the time ever comes when they learn the truth, make sure that lesson is one they never forget. Marcus smiled at Sivillith across the breakfast table as she picked at her food and ignored his attempts at conversation. He could wait. Humans were very good at waiting. It was one of the things that made them so dangerous. 3 months had passed since the wedding, and Sivillith had settled into a routine of tolerating her human husband. She slept beside him each night in a massive bed designed for Valorian proportions, which made Marcus look even smaller and more fragile. He never complained about the size difference or the temperature she preferred or any of the dozens of small discomforts that came with living in an alien palace. He simply adapted and smiled and continued being gentle. It was infuriating. Sivillith woke in the darkness of the deep night cycle to a sound that should not have been there. The reinforced doors of their chamber were being breached. She sat up immediately, her heart pounding in her chest, and reached for the ceremonial dagger hidden beneath her pillow. Political marriages invited. Political violence and assassination was a time-honored tradition in Valorian succession disputes. The Cathuri faction had opposed the human alliance from the very beginning, and Sivillith had always known they might try something like this. What she had not expected was to find herself alone in the fullest of his bed. Marcus was gone. His side of the sheets was cold, as if he had left some time ago. 4 figures slipped through the broken door, moving with the practiced silence of trained killer. Sivillith could see their crystalline blades gleaming in the faint light, coated with the purple sheen of neurotoxin that would kill even a Valorian in seconds. She gripped her dagger tighter and prepared to die. She was no warrior. She had been bred for diplomacy and beauty, and bearing heirs against 4 assassins she would Last perhaps 3 seconds. Find the human first, the lead assassin whispered, his voice barely audible. Then we take the princess. Already handled, another replied. He was not in the bed when we entered, and will find his body after we finish here. Sivillith felt a strange pang in her chest at those words. Somewhere in the 3 months of their marriage she had grown accustomed to Marcus and his gentle ways. The thought of him dead and alone somewhere in the palace corridors bothered her more than she expected. Then the lights went out, flickered, not dimmed every bioluminescent panel, every emergency glow strip, every source of illumination simply stopped working all at once. Sivillith's species could see reasonably well in low light, but this was not low light. This was absolute darkness. The kind that existed in the void between stars. The kind that swallowed everything. She heard a sound she did not recognize. It was soft and metallic, like wind passing through thin metal strings, like a whisper made of steel. Then someone screamed. The scream was cut short and replaced by a wet gurgling noise, and then there was another scream, and Anather Sivillith heard bodies hitting the floor. She heard the clash of crystalline blades against something that rang like a bell. She heard gasping and choking and the desperate sounds of beings who had suddenly realized they were not the predators in this darkness. The sounds lasted 11 seconds, then the lights came back. Sivillith blinked against the sudden brightness, and her eyes adjusted to reveal a scene from a nightmare. Husband stood in the center of the chamber, barefoot, wearing only the simple sleep clothes he always wore to bed. In his hands was a length of ancient metal, curved and cruel, gleaming with fresh violet Valorian blood. 4 assassins lay in pieces around him, their crystalline bones, the hardest organic substance known to galactic science, had been cut through like wet paper. Their bodies had been opened with surgical precision, each strike finding the exact gap in their natural armor. Marcus was not breathing hard. His hands did not shake. His face held an expression Sivillith had never seen on him before, an expression of absolute focused emptiness, as if all the warmth and gentleness had been removed and only something cold remained. Are you injured? He asked, and even his voice sounded different, flat and controlled. Sivillith could not speak. She could only stare at the weapon in his hands, at the impossible contradiction standing before her in the form of her supposedly harmless husband. It is called a katana, Marcus said, following her gaze to the blade. My family has carried one for 400 years, passed down from parent to child. He moved the blade in a quick arc, and the blood flew from its edge, splattering against the wall. It was forged in a nation called Japan on old Earth, using a method your metallurgists would say is impossible. He smiled, but it was not the warm smile she had grown accustomed to. They would be wrong. You killed them in darkness, Sivillith finally managed to whisper. Complete darkness with no light at all. Humans hunted at night for 200,000 years before we invented fire, Marcus replied. We learned to use our other senses when our eyes failed us. He slid the blade back into a sheath she had not noticed before, a simple wooden scabbard that clicked softly as the steel disappeared into it. Your people have excellent hearing, he continued. Among the best in the galaxy, from what I understand. Mine have something different. Something older, a kind of awareness. That comes from being prey for so long that we learned to feel danger in the darkness before it could find us. He looked at her then, and Sivillith saw him truly for the first time, not the gentle diplomat, not the harmless pet she had dismissed and ignored, something else entirely. Fear is a gift, Marcus said quietly. It teaches you to always be ready for the moment when being ready is the difference between life and death. Sivillith looked at the bodies on the floor and then back at her husband. What are you? She asked Marcus, considered the question for a long moment before answering. "I'm exactly what I have always been," he said. "A human who chooses to be gentle because the alternative is something neither of us wants." He stepped over the nearest body and moved toward her, his bare feet leaving bloody prints on the floor. "The question you should be asking is not what I am, but what I am willing to become to protect the things I care about." He stopped in front of her and looked up into her eyes with an intensity that made her crystalline heart stutter. 3 months ago, I did not care about much of anything on this world," he said. "But things change. People change. I find that I care about you, Princess Sivillith. More than I expected to, and more than I was supposed to." He reached out and took her hand, his small human fingers warm against her glowing skin. "I will not let anyone hurt you," he said. "Not while there is breath in my body and strength in my arms. This I promise on the blade of my ancestors." Sivillith did not know what to say. She had been raised to believe that strength meant size and power meant dominance, and that the strong protected the weak because it was their nature. But this small, soft, fragile human had just killed 4 elite Valorian assassins in total darkness and was now promising to protect her as if she were the most precious thing in the universe. For the first time since her wedding day, Sivillith began to wonder if perhaps she had fundamentally misunderstood what humans were, and for the first time she felt something other than contempt. When she looked at her husband, she felt safe. The assassination attempt sent shockwaves through the Valorian court that rippled outward for weeks. Every noble house heard the story, and every version grew more elaborate in the telling. 4 elite Cathori assassins, trained from birth in the art of silent killing, had been butchered in 11 seconds by a creature that most Valorians considered barely more than an intelligent animal. The human ambassador, the gentle, smiling diplomat who learned servant names and brought flowers to his wife, had revealed himself to be something entirely different. Sivillith found herself looking at Marcus with new eyes. In the days that followed, she noticed things she had missed before. Small details that suddenly seemed obvious and terrifying. The way he moved was not clumsy, as she had assumed, but deliberately restrained, like a predator pretending to be prey. The way he watched rooms was not nervous, but tactical, always mapping exits and threats and angles of attack. The way he smiled was not weak, but patient. The smile of someone who knew exactly what they could do and chose not to do it. She needed answers. The palace archives contained restricted files on every species the Valorian Empire had encountered, and Sivillith used her imperial access codes to unlock everything they had on humanity. What she found changed her understanding of the universe. Humans were not weak. Humans were not harmless. Humans were something far more frightening than the Valorians had ever imagined. The files documented the history of human warfare in exhaustive detail, and reading through them made Sivillith feel sick in a way she had never experienced. Before humans had even left their home planet, they had already invented weapons capable of destroying entire cities in a single blast. They called these weapons nuclear bombs, and they had built enough of them to destroy their own world several times over. They had fought wars that killed tens of millions of their own species in conflicts that lasted years and consumed entire continents. They had developed chemical weapons that melted flesh from bone, and biological agents that could wipe out populations, and machines that thought for themselves and killed without mercy. The archives contained a term that appeared again and again: total war doctrine. It described a way of fighting where there were no rules, no limits, no distinction between soldiers and civilians. Everything was a target. Everything was a weapon. Everything burned until nothing remained but ash and victory. And then, impossibly, they had stopped. The files documented something called the Long Peace, which was a period of 80 years where humanity had simply chosen not to fight each other with their most terrible weapons. Not because they could not, not because they had forgotten how, but because they had decided the cost was too high. They had built laws and institutions in something called international treaties, specifically designed to prevent themselves from ever becoming what they once were. They had chained their own capacity for destruction and forced it to serve instead of consume the Valorian military that had fought humanity at Kepler 442b, had faced what the files described as a restrained response force. These were human soldiers, operating under strict rules of engagement, forbidden from using their most devastating weapons, ordered to minimize casualties on both sides, and they had still fought the mightiest fleet in the galaxy to a standstill. The files contained a quote from a human general named Victoria Chun, who had spoken during the peace treaty negotiations. "You want to know why we are agreeing to peace? Because if we do not, eventually you will push us far enough that we remember what we used to be. And nobody wants that. Not even us." Sivillith closed the files and sat in darkness for a long time, trying to process what she had learned. Her people had conquered 12 star systems. They had crushed every species they encountered through biological superiority and military genius. They had believed themselves to be the apex predators of the galaxy, the ultimate expression of evolution's hunger for dominance. But humans had done something the Valorians had never imagined was possible. They had conquered themselves. They had looked at their own capacity for destruction, their own terrible potential, and they had chosen to build cages around it. Not because they were weak, because they were terrified of what they could become. Sivillith found Marcus in the palace gardens, practicing with his sword. She watched him from a distance, seeing the way. His body flowed through forms that were older than starlight travel, techniques passed down through generations of human warriors. Every movement was precise and controlled, and deadly in ways she was only beginning to understand. "How long have you known I was here?" she asked when he finally stopped. "Since you entered the garden," he replied without turning around. "Your steps are very distinctive. I read the restricted files on your species." Marcus turned to face her, and his expression was calm and patient as always. "And what did you learn?" "I learned that you are monsters," Sivillith said. "Your history is written in blood and fire and the screams of millions. I learned that you built weapons that could crack planets and viruses that could end civilizations and machines that killed without conscience or hesitation." Marcus nodded slowly, accepting her words without argument. "All of that is true," he said. "But I also learned that you stopped," Sivillith continued. "I learned that you looked at what you had become and chose to be something else. Why? Why would the most dangerous species in the galaxy put chains on its own power?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "Do you know what fear feels like?" he asked finally. "Not the fear of death which all creatures share, but the fear of becoming something you cannot control. The fear of looking in a mirror and seeing a monster looking back." "No," Sivillith admitted. "My people have never known such fear." "That is because your people have never had reason to fear themselves," Marcus said. "You are strong and proud and certain of your place in the universe. But humans have stood on the edge of extinction a dozen times, and every time it was because of what we did to each other. We learned through terrible experience that the greatest threat to humanity was humanity itself." He sheathed his sword and walked toward her, his footsteps silent on the garden path. "Gentleness is not weakness," he said. "Gentleness is the hardest strength there is. Anyone can be violent when violence is easy, but choosing not to be violent when you have the power to destroy everything around you, that requires more courage than any battle." He stopped in front of her and looked up into her eyes with an expression she was beginning to recognize as love. "I am dangerous," he said. "I will never deny that. But I am also kind and patient and gentle because I choose to be, not because I cannot be otherwise, because I know what I am capable of, and I refuse to become that thing unless there is no other choice." Sivillith felt something shift inside her. Some barrier she had built around her heart's beginning to crack. "You value me," she said, remembering his words from the night of the assassination. "You said you care about me more than you expected to." "Yes." "Why?" Marcus smiled, and this time it was the warm, genuine smile she had first seen on the landing platform. "Because you are worth caring about," he said simply. "Because beneath your coldness and your pride, there is someone extraordinary trying to find her way. Because you looked at the monster who killed 4 assassins in the darkness, and instead of running, you asked me why." He reached out and took her hand, his small human fingers warm against her glowing skin. "I think perhaps we are more alike than either of us realized. Princess Sivillith, we are both dangerous in our own ways, and we are both learning that strength means more than simply being able to destroy." For the first time, Sivillith did not pull away from his touch. For the first time, she found herself wanting to understand this strange, dangerous, gentle creature she had married. For the first time, she began to wonder if perhaps this arranged marriage might become something more than a political necessity, and somewhere deep in her crystalline hearts, something that felt suspiciously like hope began to bloom. 1 week after the assassination attempt, Emperor Kadarin summoned Marcus to his private chamber. Sivillith was not invited. She stood outside the massive doors for 3 hours, waiting, wondering, worrying in ways she did not fully understand. Her father was many things, ruthless and calculating and ancient. In both years and cunning, he had ruled the Valorian Empire for 300 years and had personally commanded fleets that burned worlds to ash. He was not cruel without purpose, but he was absolutely willing to be cruel when purpose demanded it. Sivillith could not shake the memory of her husband's blade cutting through assassins like paper. She could not forget the emptiness in his eyes or the blood on his bare feet, but she also could not forget the warmth of his hand holding hers or the way he had promised to protect her with such absolute certainty. When the doors finally opened, Marcus walked out unharmed, more than unharmed. He was smiling, truly smiling, with a lightness she had never seen in him before. Her father walked beside him like an equal, one massive clawed hand resting on Marcus's shoulder, in a gesture that looked almost affectionate. Scive stared at them both in shock. "Father," she managed. "What happened in there?" "Your husband," the Emperor said, and his ancient voice held something that might have been wonder, "has taught me something I did not expect to learn at my age." What could a human possibly teach the conqueror of 12 systems? The Emperor laughed, a sound so rare and unexpected that Sivillith nearly stumbled backward. She could not remember the last time she had heard her father laugh with genuine amusement. "I showed him the trophy hall," the Emperor explained. "I showed him the preserved remains of every species we have conquered and every world we have claimed. I showed him the weapons we stripped from our fallen enemies and the banners we burned. I expected him to be intimidated or perhaps to beg for mercy on behalf of his people." The Emperor's bioluminescent markings pulsed with amusement as he looked at Marcus with an expression Sivillith could only describe as respect. "Do you know what he said to me?" Sivillith shook her head. "He said, 'My people have a room like this. We call it a history museum. We put our trophies there too, but we put them next to our mistakes,' he said. 'It helps us remember that the line between conquest and catastrophe is thinner than we like to admit.'" The Emperor released Marcus's shoulder and walked toward his daughter, his footsteps heavy with the weight of centuries. "Then he told me about something called the Long Peace," the Emperor continued. 80 years were the most violent species in their region of space simply chose not to fight. Not because they could. Not because they had forgotten how, because they decided the cost was too high. They built systems and laws and traditions specifically designed to prevent themselves from ever becoming what they once were. The Emperor stopped in front of Sivillith and looked down at her with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. Do you understand what that means? Daughter, it means they were weak, Sivillith said. But the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. No, the Emperor said firmly. It means they were strong in a way we have never been. Any species can conquer when they have the power to do so. That is simple. That is easy. That is what we have done for 300 years, because we never learned any other way. But a species that conquers itself. A species that chains its own demons and forces them to serve instead of destroy. That is something else entirely. The Emperor turned to look at Marcus, who stood quietly listening to this exchange. Your husband showed me recordings of human history, the Emperor said. He showed me the wars they fought and the weapons they built and the destruction they caused. He showed me what they called the World Wars and the Cold War and the Edge conflicts. And then he showed me how they pulled back from the brink every time. How they looked at annihilation and chose life instead. Not because they were afraid of dying, because they were afraid of becoming something that could no longer stop killing. Sivillith looked at Marcus with new understanding. That is why you pretended to be harmless, she said. That is why you smiled and made jokes and let my brother insult you. Not because you were weak. Because you knew that showing your true nature would have frightened us into doing something foolish. Marcus nodded slowly. Humans learned a long time ago that fear is a terrible foundation for peace, he said. When people are afraid, they make decisions based on survival rather than wisdom. They attack first and ask questions never. I did not want that for our peoples. I did not want the Lorian Empire to look at humanity and see a threat that needed to be eliminated before it could grow stronger. He looked at the Emperor with an expression of genuine gratitude. Your father understood what I was trying to do. Even before I explained it, he saw through my harmless act the moment I arrived. But he chose to watch and wait and see what would happen next. Sivillith turned to her father in surprise. You knew, I suspected, the Emperor admitted. The Battle of Kepler 442b taught me to be cautious about assumptions regarding humans. I saw things there that I have never spoken of. Things that convinced me these small, soft creatures were far more dangerous than they appeared. When Marcus arrived all smiles and flowers, I recognized the act for what it was. A predator pretending to be prey. But I also recognized something else. The Emperor placed his hand on Sivillith's shoulder. A rare gesture of parental affection. I recognized hope, he said. Hope that perhaps our peoples could find a better way than war. Hope that the alliance sealed by your marriage could become something real and lasting. Hope that my daughter might find something more than duty in her new life. He looked at Marcus with something that was almost a smile. I am very glad we made peace with humanity, the Emperor said. And I am very glad you married this one. He will take care of you in ways that go beyond simple protection. He will challenge you and change you, and help you become something greater than you imagined you could be. The Emperor walked back toward his private chambers, his ancient bones creaking with each step. I am going to rest now, he said. Ruling an empire is exhausting work, and I am not as young as I once was. Perhaps one day soon I will hand this burden to someone younger. Perhaps to a daughter who has learned that strength comes in many forms. And perhaps to a son-in-law who has taught an old conqueror the value of choosing peace. He disappeared through the doors and left Sivillith and Marcus alone in the corridor. They stood in silence for a long moment. Neither sure what to say. Finally, Marcus reached out and took Sivillith's hand in his. Your father is remarkable, he said. I expected hostility or suspicion, and instead I found wisdom and understanding. He is the conqueror of 12 systems, Sivillith said. He has done terrible things in the name of our empire. Yes, Marcus agreed. But he is also capable of growth and change, even after 300 years. That is perhaps the most hopeful thing I have learned since arriving on your world. If someone who has spent centuries building an empire through conquest can learn to value peace, then perhaps there is hope for all of us. Sivillith looked at their joined hands. His small and warm, hers large and glowing. I am beginning to think, she said slowly, that this marriage may not be the burden I originally believed it to be. Marcus smiled his warm, genuine smile. I am glad to hear you say that, he said, because I have felt the same way for some time now. I just did not know how to tell you. They walked together through the palace corridors, hand in hand. And for the first time, Sivillith felt like they were truly partners rather than strangers forced together by politics, whatever challenges awaited them, whatever enemies might rise against their alliance. She was beginning to believe they could face them together, and that belief felt stronger than any weapon she had ever known. 6 months had passed since the wedding, and Sivillith had changed in ways she never expected. She smiled more often now, laughed at Marcus's jokes, and found herself looking forward to their evenings together in the palace gardens. She had even begun learning to tend the earth roses he had planted, nurturing the delicate alien flowers with a care she had never shown for anything before. Their relationship had grown from cold tolerance to genuine affection to something that felt suspiciously like love. But peace is a fragile thing, and there were those in the Empire who would rather see it shattered than allow humanity to gain a foothold in Valorian space. The second assassination attempt came without warning. 30 warriors in full combat armor stormed the palace, supported by a rogue admiral's warship hanging in orbit above the capital city. They were not Cathuri faction this time, but something worse. Military veterans who believed the peace treaty was a betrayal of everything the Empire stood for. They had weapons and training in numbers, and they had timed their attack for the moment when most of the palace guard was away on ceremonial duties. Sivillith was with her father in the throne room when the attack began. Emergency barriers slammed down across the palace entrances and warning sirens filled the air with their screaming. The orbital display showed the rebel warship powering up its weapons, targeting the throne room itself. Where is Marcus? Sivillith demanded, looking around frantically for her husband. Here, said a voice from the entrance. Marcus walked into the throne room alone, wearing simple clothes, carrying his ancestral blade. He looked very small against the massive doorway. He looked very calm against the chaos erupting around them. You should stay with the guards, Sivillith said, rushing toward him. There are 30 of them, trained warriors with crystalline armor and plasma weapons. I know, Marcus said. They will kill you. They will try. He looked at her with those warm brown eyes she had grown to love, and she saw something else beneath the warmth. That cold, focused emptiness she had witnessed on the night of the first assassination. The monster behind the mask, the predator beneath the gentle smile. Stay with your father, Marcus said. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, stay in this room until I come back for you. Marcus, please, do you trust me? Sivillith looked at her husband, this small, soft, fragile human who had somehow become the most important person in her universe. Yes, she said. I trust you, and trust me now. He kissed her, brief and fierce, and then he was gone, walking toward the 30 warriors who had come to destroy everything they were building together. The Emperor made no move to stop him. Father, Sivillith pleaded, do something, help him. Watch, the Emperor said calmly, and learn what your husband truly is. The rebel warriors poured into the main hall, expecting to find panicked guards and terrified nobles. Instead, they found a single human standing in their path, blocking the entrance to the throne room with nothing but a curved metal blade. Move aside. Human, the rebel leader commanded. Our quarrel is not with you. Actually, Marcus said, it very much is. The princess is under my protection. The Emperor is under my protection. This palace is under my protection. And you will not touch any of them while I still breathe." The rebel leader laughed. A harsh scraping sound. "There are 30 of us, little creature. 30 trained warriors with the finest weapons in the Empire. You have a sword. A primitive piece of metal from a primitive world. Step aside, and we will let you live." Marcus smiled. And it was not the warm smile Sivillith loved. It was something older and colder and far more frightening. "My people have a saying," he said. "If you want peace, prepare for war." He drew his blade in a single fluid motion, and the steel sang as it left the scabbard. "I have prepared my entire life for this moment. I suggest you prepare to die." What followed was not a battle. It was a massacre. Marcus moved through the rebel warriors like water through stone, his blade finding every gap in their crystalline armor, his body flowing around attacks that should have killed him 100 times over. He used their size against them, ducking beneath their massive arms and striking at the vulnerable joints where crystal met flesh. He used their certainty against them, letting them commit to attacks and then simply not being where they expected him to be. He used their numbers against them, positioning himself so they blocked each other's lines. A fire entangled each. Others' weapons Sivillith watched through the throne room's observation screens and found herself unable to look away. This was what humanity could become when the chains came off. This was the monster they had locked inside themselves for 80 years of peace. This was her husband, the gentleman who brought her flowers and learned servant names and made her laugh with his terrible jokes. The battle lasted 4 minutes when it ended. Marcus stood alone among the fallen, breathing hard for the first time, his sword dripping violet blood from hilt to tip. Not a single rebel remained standing. Marcus looked up at the orbital display where the rogue warship was still targeting the palace. Then he did something unexpected. He sheathed his blade and knelt, pressing his forehead to the blood-stained floor in a gesture of absolute submission. "What is he doing?" Sivillith breathed. The Emperor laughed. That same rare, genuine laugh she had heard a week ago. "He is showing the sword's other edge," her father said. "The strength that comes from knowing when not to fight. Watch and understand." A new signal appeared on the orbital display, then another. Then a dozen more human warships dropping out of hyperspace, surrounding the rebel vessel in a formation that left no avenue of escape. They had been waiting, hidden beyond sensor range. For exactly this moment, a communication crackled through the throne room speakers. Admiral Vexthes said a cold human voice. "This is the HS Remember Kepler. You are targeting a diplomatic residence protected by treaty provisions. You have 30 seconds to power down weapons and surrender. If you refuse, we will demonstrate what human naval doctrine looks like without restrictions. Your choice." The rebel warship powered down its weapons in 12 seconds. Sivillith watched as Marcus rose from his kneeling position and turned toward the throne room. Toward her, "The blade is only part of what humans are," he called out, his voice carrying through the observation screens. "The will to sheathe it is the rest. Anyone can fight. Anyone can kill. But knowing when to stop, when to offer mercy, when to choose peace over victory, that is what makes us more than monsters." Sivillith ran from the throne room, past the emergency barriers, through the blood-soaked halls until she reached her husband. She threw her arms around him, not caring about the gore that stained his clothes or the violence she had just witnessed. He caught her and held her, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. "I misjudged you," Sivillith whispered against his neck. "From the very first moment I saw you, I misunderstood everything." "You judged what I showed you," Marcus replied. "I should have shown you the truth sooner." "Show me now," she said, pulling back to look into his eyes. "Show me everything, the monster and the man, the warrior and the diplomat. Show me who really are, and I will love all of it. Marcus smiled. And this time the warmth and the coldness were both visible. Two halves of the same whole. I am human, he said. We are gentle because we choose to be gentle. We are kind because we choose to be kind. And we are absolutely terrifying when someone threatens the things we love. He kissed her again. There in the blood-stained throne room of the Valorian Empire, surrounded by the proof of what he could become when necessary. And Sivillith finally understood the truth about humanity. They were not harmless. They had never been harmless. They were simply choosing to be good, and that choice, made fresh every single day in the face of every temptation to do otherwise, was the most powerful thing in the galaxy. More powerful than crystalline bones or bioluminescent skin, more powerful than fleets or weapons or empires, the choice to be better than you are capable of being. That was what humans offered the universe, and Sivillith was honored to stand beside one of them for the rest of her long, long life.